Folks, welcome back. It's Zaide in my new form with my new swag for the 25th anniversary of EverQuest. I have this EverQuest hoodie. Hopefully you can see it. And this hat, which barely fits my ginormous head. I'm here joined today by Liverflap, who also has a ginormous head. No offense, Liverflap. And we're going to be discussing the lore of Permafrost and a little bit of the Barbarians. But hey, before we start that, as always, I got to give a shout out. Our newest patron, Jake. Thank you for supporting the podcast. It means a lot. And all the other patrons who have been shouted out in the past and continue to be patrons, or even patrons who have gone on from being patrons. You guys are all great. Thank you so much. Liverflap, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. A little slighted by the head comment, but it's not slanderous if it's true. So yeah, 7 7/8. I can barely fit anything on here.
We often joke in my house that my daughter got her head size from me. We can barely fit dresses on her. It's
Really?
crazy. She walks around. It's like too heavy for her. She's like falling over and stuff.
Oh, that's hilarious. Yeah, it makes it so that I cannot commit any fashion crimes with headwear, which is probably a good thing.
Yeah. Well, for this one episode, I'm going to keep the hat on. There's nothing here. I'll show you guys. There's nothing crazy going on, right? Like I don't have like a deformed head today or something. But I'm
no more than usual.
On. Yeah, no more than usual. That's correct. Yeah. Before we jump in, man, you're now officially a moderator of the Twitch stream.
I know. I saw that, and I immediately screwed up and put into emote only. Is that like a rite of passage for your moderators? Because Slazik said he's done that before.
I think you know what? Like most of my moderators really don't have to do very much, and they really don't moderate anything. They're just like people who hang out a lot. There was a time in like 2020 when Slazik actually was a genuine moderator who was there because I streamed like on a schedule for many months. And then I made partner and there was no longer a goal left and I need a goal or else I just don't operate. And so, yeah.
I mean, that's like the person that blows all their DKP on the BIS item, right? You won Twitch streaming. So
yeah. And then after they get the item, they log off and they never come back.
Until the next X-Pack. Yes.
Yeah. It's exactly like that. Man, so this weekend, I streamed Pantheon for 24 hours. I was awake for 40 of the 48 hours of the weekend, and I haven't slept like the 8 hours were last night, and I'm so tired right now. But I'm excited because we've been putting this off. We've been talking about doing this for, it's got to be like a month, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been a while. In that time, I had enough time to get a new mic because I listened to our last episode and I was so unpleased. So hopefully this will address that.
Well, you know, you are your harshest critic. I thought you sounded fine.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's a pretty through line in my life.
Well, I mean, I think it's how we ought to be. Anyway, before I don't want to get philosophical here. Today for Permafrost, primary source always EverQuest. Secondary source, boom. And along with our primary source of just like EverQuest as it exists at this moment, we have a little bit of a bonus. GM events. There's some GM event scripting that exists that we'll talk about. And if you guys know, maybe you don't, maybe you do. In Classic, the game came out and you just had that little bit of lore that was available in the game. And then the plot moved a lot. The needle of plot moved a lot in Classic and Kunark EverQuest. But it was all done in-game via GM events, where a GM would come in and there'd be a character named Frona Vi played, literally puppeted by a GM, walking through because they didn't like script a bunch of like AI or anything. They just had them play the part and literally type, to audiences of people and stuff. So we'll be talking about 2 of those today.
It'd be really awkward if you were like piloting Furiona Vi and you misspelt something that was extremely lore important, and that typo just becomes
that's the screenshot that survives for 20 years.
100%.
Yeah. Or you're talking to someone with like a really weird, like non-RP name.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. They used to be really strict about those names, by the way.
I remember that. I remember it was like you can have nothing that references like an existing property, like nothing Lord of the Rings related, nothing that's real world related.
That's actually how I got the name Zaide. I had a character named Captain, a ranger, and I was soloing in Crystal Caverns, my favorite zone, and a GM came up to me and was like, hey, your name violates our naming policies. You have a few minutes here, but I'm going to change your name. You can pick the name or I will pick one for you. And I was like, oh, wow. I don't remember if he picked it or if I picked it, but either way, I left that encounter with a ranger named Zaide.
Wow, that is incredible. I'm always interested, like where people get their handles from, where they get their names from.
What gets me is, if you were ever back in Crystal Caverns, you were probably like the only person there when you went. So who the heck reported me?
Someone just zoning in and zoning out. They're so put off by the ranger captain. What was your surname going to be? Or what was your surname?
My surname was Ashton. I named my character
Captain
after
Ashton.
the guard captain from High Pass.
Ooh, yeah, that's you were kind of pushing it.
Yeah. Well, if you remember High Keep, High Pass, East Corona, that's like my favorite strip of land in EQ. Like I love that area. And then Velius came out, you know what I mean? And so then I found Crystal Caverns. That became my new favorite. But for Classic and Kunark, all of that time, basically East Corona, High Pass, and High Keep were the place I was always at.
I'm gonna become a patron so that I can request High Keep eventually as one of these episodes.
Dude, High Keep is a tough zone to do the lore for. There's a lot of shit going on in High Keep.
A lot of unreliable narrators, it seems like. A lot of subterfuge.
Yeah, and there's also like 10 GM event scripts from High Keep that we'd have to go through. And the GM event scripts, by the way, these are like lore scripts written by game devs, not it's not Hollywood writing, if you know what I mean. Anyway, people are probably like turning the podcast off because we spent 7 minutes not talking about permafrost. So, as you guys know from watching the giant lore episode, and if you didn't watch that, pause this and go watch that right now. As you know, the Relosian Empire, the seat of the Relosian Empire in the world, the capital area, so to speak, or at least the place of power for the giants, was what we now know as Everfrost Peaks. And there was an ogre city there as well. The main faction of giants were there. And it was where the curse sort of was laid down upon Norath when the Relosian Empire was defeated by the Wrath Council for invading the plane of Earth. So it was most severe there, and it spread out after that. That's why the giants that are in permafrost are literally just big blocks of ice and stone. The curse was so severe, you know what I mean? So when we talk about the giants and we talk about permafrost, really we're talking about the history of the giants after the curse. So basically the first thing the giants did after the curse was pushed down was they created permafrost. While they still had a little bit of ingenuity left, that old power wasn't all gone. They built permafrost, and it took a decade or two to totally build it, and it was massive. It had like five towers and all these floors, and it was the seat of the giants as the curse took a greater and greater toll on them over the years, to the point where they no longer had the ability to construct anything akin to the place where they lived. And even that place was a shadow of their former empire, which was totally destroyed in the curse itself. So all those ogre ruins and everything are buried under, quote, like dozens of feet of ice. But nevertheless, the ice giant king commanded them to build it, and they built what we know as permafrost.
Hey, Zaide, clarification. This curse, I keep having to wrap my head around it. Was it from Ralosek or was it from the Wrath Council? Because I know
from the whole, I think it's from the whole Pantheon. Well, a subsection of the Pantheon, but primarily from the Wrath Council itself.
Okay, so this is like heavily political because of the Relosian attack on Earthplane.
Right. And it was like, I'm pretty sure that Ralosek was imprisoned in Drunder. Like, they're like, okay, now you stay in your plane, because the second time the Relosian Empire, they did this twice. The first time they invaded, they just got, didn't go great. Then Ralosek was like, no, we're going to run that back. And he took the army right back there and invaded Earthplane with them. And they're like, dude, we don't do that. Like, they can kill all the humans or whatever, but like, this is us. And so Ralos was in the hot seat for a while, and they really wanted to make an example out of the Relosian Empire, which was the premier empire at that time. There was one other empire of similar strength, but it wasn't nearly as massive as the Relosian Empire, and that was the Shisar Empire. They both coexisted at the same time. It's why the Relosians didn't conquer Kunark, because when they went to Kunark, they saw, oh shit, you know what I mean? And they both, according to the lore, for some reason decided not to fight, even though it is way out of character for the Relosian Empire to not, they should basically like Goku this, and they see someone strong, they're like, let me at them. But they decided not to fight and went about their own things. And the Shisar, as we know, of course, this is becoming like a Relosian Empire podcast episode. The Shisar were doing the same shit that the Relosian Empire did. They were traveling the planes. In fact, they were masters of planar travel. And supposedly they were attacking lower order gods, like demigods kind of stuff, which is why Emp even has a sword, the Sword of Straja, which identifies as the Strajan Sword of God Slaying. And he started having his people worship him as a god instead of Khazad-Thul. Next thing you know, boom, green mist. So when you start messing with the gods in Norath, they do not fuck around with how they respond to you.
It was really interesting to read into that Permafrost book that I just happened to have a copy of myself in my house, of course. And reading about how when these ice giants were constructing permafrost, it seemed like there was a lot of paranoia as well against the other godly denizens of the area, the northern men, the barbarian, right? Essentially the the likeness of Nathaniel Marr. At least it mentions that part of the impetus to make permafrost may have been worries of further godly or further pantheonic disfavor against them.
Yeah, I think they even, when they first discovered the barbarians, the Northmen, the giants thought that they were part of the curse. Like, they were so heavily impacted by this. The next group of people they saw that they didn't recognize were like, oh, is this more? Is it still happening? But it was really just, it's funny though, because we know that Nathaniel Marr actually participated in the battle in the plane of Earth, because he killed Solon McMore, a famous general of Ralos Sec, and one of the highest ranking giants on the battlefield, was killed in one strike by Nathaniel Marr. So we know he was there. And then the Marr twins would go on to make the Barbarians. So it was almost like the Barbarians and the giants were destined to be at odds.
This is like really interesting psychology to be around a couple of giants that will soon learn kind of get stuck in this fort, in this permafrost keep for one reason or another.
Yeah, so I mean, basically, they build permafrost and they live there for a long time, and then the barbarians are there and they fight, but the barbarians are divided into a bunch of different tribes, and they fight each other too. Eventually, Dugan the Golden is loved. Name. Yeah, he's loved by Aralasi Marr and seen as noble and honorable by Nathaniel Marr, and they give him basically the divine mandate, and he unites all the tribes. And united barbarians are now looking for something to take on, and they pick the giants, and they go and they fight the giants. They invade permafrost. They defeat pretty much all the giants there. They're scattered and almost completely all slain. And then they don't stop there. Then they're like, okay, now we're going to tear permafrost down so they can never come back. And that's why the permafrost that you see in the game, it's one of the reasons why it's like nothing like what we described in the beginning. I know someone here was like, there's no towers of permafrost. There's only the two outside. Someone was writing the note right to my email. Yes, you're right. It's because Dugan the Golden destroyed it all. The only thing they couldn't destroy was like at the bottommost layers, the foundation, right? That first floor was so well constructed and so thick that it was just, they didn't have the time to sit there and tear it apart stone by stone. So that was what was left.
So when we first go in there, we go through that little L-shaped sort of passageway. And then over on the right, there's a bunch of like rocks and boulders that have fallen down. So I'm guessing that is probably just a natural extension of the original entrance, or one of the original entrances to permafrost.
So what you're talking about when you're inside the zone line already, right?
Yep, because to the left you have the ladder. And that's going up to like this excavation tunnel that the goblins seem to have dug, or they're residing there.
So that's actually something I wanted to talk about here, is because you walk in there, right? And when I was reading about the lore of this, the first thing I thought about was there is so much space in permafrost that a giant physically cannot fit in. It doesn't make any sense. Then I read about how they destroyed it. I was like, okay, that makes sense. So then, obviously the goblins eventually find their way there, and it all sort of falls into place. But yeah, when you look to the right, that passage continued to the right. You know what I mean? And it would have continued around a different way. But instead, that was totally blocked off. And the tunnels that we see, that was all crafted by the giants.
Yeah, because that's ice giant sized.
Right. Or sorry, the little tunnels that we go through, those were all crafted by the goblins, just doing goblin shit. And you could tell it's just like a chaotic, like obviously was mined out. You know what I mean? They were like, oh, these walls are all stopping right here. Let's just break one and keep digging.
Yeah, it feels like runny eye with snow.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, exactly that. So anyway, they're pushed out, and like 200 years goes by. The barbarians have their whole own set of issues, right? Like this comes into, we'll just touch on this really quick, why the barbarians can't be paladins in EverQuest. Like they were created by basically the paladin god, right? Nathaniel Mar, Aralsi Mar. They can't even worship those gods when you create them. They can worship Ralosek and the Tribunal, and you're like, why? Why don't they worship the people that created them? They're one of the few races in EQ that don't worship their creator. It's because eventually one of the Dugan's line would, go all the way down, and they'd all be kings, right? Eventually they had Killian Bloodaxe. He was not a good ruler. He was a big tyrant. And the barbarians prayed to the Mar twins for help, and they ignored the barbarians because they loved Dugan the Golden, and they loved his whole family line so much. So they wouldn't do anything. Nathaniel Mar was like, he would win in a fight against any of you guys. So by the standard of the duel, he should be king. And Aralsi Mar just loved him. She's like, I can't, empower you to take up arms against the family of Dugan. So this guy named Connell decides he's going to fight him anyway, because life is just terrible. So he goes and battles Killian in a duel to the death, and he asks for any god to help him bring justice for his people, and the tribunal answer. And after that, he sets up his kingdom, and evermore the barbarians worship the tribunal for coming to them in their time of need.
That's like one of the few times that we see a race forsaken even momentarily by their patron god in EverQuest. Like the green mist is, the obvious big example here, but that still doesn't like separate the Ixar from Khazak-Thul. If anything, he says, no, now you get closer to me. You listen, tighter to what I have to say. So, wow. I guess the Mar twins really don't play around.
No, yeah, I mean it's very surprising, right? But the reasoning is at least in character for them, and you could see it. Especially Nathaniel Mar, I can empathize with. Yeah, so I think they fucked up. They probably maybe feel that way in retrospect because they lost that devotion.
I wonder if we would have seen sort of a different predilection of the barbarians in terms of their priestly magic. Maybe we would have seen them as clerics.
Right. Yeah, probably wouldn't have had shamans.
Instead of shamans, yeah. Because shamans are very much about the balance between nature and elements. Not quite druidy, but they feel like that.
They're like a savage form of natural magic. You know what I mean? I think of shaman, this is totally wrong. You know what I mean? But what I think of is druid as the feminine side of nature magic. And the masculine side is on the shaman.
That's interesting. I could see that shamanism, especially in EQ, is a little bit more primordially based, a little bit more raw.
Yeah.
And there is either, when we're talking about Tuner's love and motherhood, or Karana's sort of keeper of the plains sort of persona, that there is a little bit more of a caretaker aspect there than shamanism.
Yeah. Yeah, there's like a savage, isn't like a savage spirit. No, that's probably a Beast Lord thing. But there's like a savage kind of primal element to shamanism and EQ. No, literally no commentary here about real life, by the way. This is only in the context of EQ. So it felt like more of a masculine approach to the same thing to me. But shamanism also deals a lot with the spirits. Like there's like a whole spirit world in EQ that basically is only slightly touched on in the lore, unless you look in weird places like the Cairns in Stonebrute Mountains. And shamanism is deep into that, but we just don't hear much about it.
I guess that makes sense. You don't really find a lot of elves or halflings talking about their ancestors, but
Right.
that does fit a little bit tighter into the Ixar, the Barbarian, sort of more of those like honor-bound races.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So the
Anywho.
Barbarians eventually make this big city around a lake out there. Loch Lear, I think it's called, doesn't even exist anymore in the game, but they have a thriving society in the north, and then something happens called the Devastation, which is like the giants come back, but they have teamed up with the gnolls, the orcs, and the goblins in the region, and they all attack simultaneously in the middle of the night from the top of the peaks. They're throwing boulders and stuff, and it basically shatters the barbarian society. They have to flee to what we now know as Hallis and kind of restart there. The barbarians eventually, or sorry, not the barbarians, the ice giants eventually rediscover Permafrost. A guy named Cave Walker is sent by one of the kings of the ice giants to go reclaim it, because he's like, hey, I found this thing out here, in a scouting party. He's like, take like 20 giants and take it back. So he goes there and he does it. And then the barbarians have their like, hey, we're coming back, right? And they wipe out the rest of the ice giants. And suddenly the giants that are in permafrost, they hunker down and stay hidden. They're the only ice giants left. The rest are gone, like truly gone. Am I getting that right, Liverflap?
That's what I read. It sounds like there's like a barbarian apocalypse that befalls them. And you've really just got this little contingent that's stuck inside. When I was reading too, I was thinking like, if Cave Dweller is in there with his little crew, this has probably got to be pretty spooky, pretty reminiscent to them of that fear of being further cursed, of being further tested by their gods. Yeah, kind of interesting.
I mean, they see him as a curse in the first place. It's just like a lingering aspect. I wonder how old Cave Walker is, and I wonder what the lifespan of the ice giants.
It's a good question.
Has been like. Like, are some of the ice giants who are around hundreds of years later still the ones from back then, or have they aged out and now it's just a generation of giants who never knew the heights of their power? Can they even breed? I don't know if they can. I don't know if the ice giants that we see in EverQuest can repopulate.
Or also, like, are they sharing oral traditions? You know what I mean?
I thought you were going to say something else.
Thanks, Zaide.
It's like a popsicle.
Yeah. We'll see it a little bit later if we talk about the fact that there are priests in ice giant priests in the zone. But that suggests to me that there's some sort of like liturgical sense to them, some sort of, if not documentation, at least oral history. So I'm trying to place myself into like a modern day ice giant after the devastation. You've been completely wiped out by beings of another god. Even if it's the tribunal, you can't imagine the tribunal's too happy with the Relosians. Like that's got to be a place where you feel like it's you against the world. And then, Zaide, are there other like dynamics that play into all of the denizens in permafrost? Because I imagine that if somebody else came into that space and you're already in this kind of rough headspace, that might affect the way that you choose to treat or parlay with others.
Well, yeah, obviously at first there's not. It's just the giants there, and I think the barbarians discover them and just like seal the doors shut and are like, gotcha, you know what I mean? And they just seal them in there. But the giants obviously discover the second area. And in fact, now that I'm thinking of this, I bet you when they sealed the doors shut, that's that rocky area by the ladder that we're thinking of. And because that tunnel obviously wasn't there, that was later dug.
It makes sense. It's west facing. It's toward Hollis, or where Loch Lear would have been previously.
And they find a secret passage, a secret tunnel out, and that's how they go forage for supplies and food. And they just keep doing that for a long time. And one day they come out and they find there's a bunch of goblins here, and they fight at first. There's like a bunch of skirmishes between the goblins and the ice giants, but the ice giants come out so infrequently that by the time they discovered the goblins, and when I say come out, I mean like they stay in their little section of what we know of as permafrost. They don't even like go throughout the whole thing. So by the time they discover the goblins are like, yo, we live here. What are you doing? You know what I mean? Like they've been there for a minute.
They're
And
like
they do all this
cockroaches.
fighting. The goblins overall are not a huge threat to the ice giants, but one thread throughout the whole ice giant history after the curse is they're just a people that are exhausted. They don't have the energy to do anything. And they're like fighting the goblins at first, and they're like, there's a lot of those things out there. Like, I don't want to just fight. Like, they can't kill us, but dude, that's a lot of them. And then they just are like, they don't make a deal with them. They just stop fighting them. And the goblins are like, okay, cool. And then they both just live in permafrost. And the goblin kings call themselves the king of permafrost and the surrounding areas. Like, they see it as their territory. And by the way, there's these giants over here, and I'm the king of them too. I just don't ask them to do anything, so there's never any concerns. That's kind of how the goblins approach it.
Yeah, it's very don't ask, don't tell.
Yeah. Now, this book expands the goblins a lot into like 3 different factions of goblins that come at different times. And overall, it just deviated too far from what we know in game. And I consider the game the primary canonicity for EverQuest. So I'm not going to go into it too much because I just don't, you know what I mean? It's just too far from what the game has established.
I read through the other factions. I don't think we're missing too much. And I'm like the guy who loves to dive into speculation and, non-canon stuff. I don't think there's a ton there. I think it was a way for them to break up in the D&D book different level ranges for monsters for you to fight.
Yeah, because like I'm all about adding content from the books that is just expanding, right? But this doesn't just expand. It kind of like contradicts because it suggests that there's like a green-skinned goblin race that is in permafrost. And we just know that to not be true during the Age of Turmoil, at least. So
one of the things that I loved about that book was how it expanded on the goblins' love of, quote, archeology. Because there's a goblin archaeologist in there. And it's like, what, aren't goblins pretty simple for that? The reasoning that the book gives is that goblins recognize that other civilizations have a lot of power stored in their artifacts and their history and their magic. And so when they come across a ruin, they're like, let's check it out. Maybe we can power up. Maybe there's something here that we can kind of take back and assimilate into us.
Yeah, it makes sense. Everything that we see from goblins, not just here, but everywhere, they're always digging into things. It strikes me that they're like just a curious race. And remember, when we talk about goblins, that they were part of the Relosian Empire too. And the curse against the goblins was said to be so severe that no history of it survives. The goblins don't even know exactly what happened to them. So it's arguable that the goblins may have faced the most severe punishment of all of this for whatever reason.
I wonder if that gives them a natural predilection to try and look and seek for some of their history too.
I think that's what it implied. It mentions, and they're like, when they come to permafrost and they're digging these tunnels, they're digging into the ice and finding things from the Relosian Empire. They're finding artifacts and stuff like that. And that is part of their shared heritage. And almost everywhere we look with goblins digging into stuff in their own territories, they're actually doing like pretty significant things, like
Soleil with the fire giants,
right? And they're digging towards the
heart of the mountain.
Yeah, the heart of fire from Soul.
Excuse me.
I think that's what it's called, Heart of Fire from Solsec Row, and then the ones in High Keep and sorry, I'm sick, folks. I've been sick for like 600 weeks because I have a kid and she goes to daycare. So it's a military daycare, which means there's kids from all over the world, which means I'm sick because some guy coughed in Istanbul 8 weeks ago. Anyway, the goblins that are in Runny Eye and High Keep, same tribe of goblins. The Picklaw.
Picklaw.
Is it Picklaw or Picklaw?
That is a really good question. Here, you keep going. I'll look that up. But yeah, they're kind of digging for fulgrim stones, right?
I think they describe them as discovering a strange dark metal, and then suddenly the dark elves are invading Highkeep. So I have always surmised that what they found, without realizing it, was the stuff to make Fulligan soul stones of Inneruk, aka transport yourself to the plane of hate.
So
It's
it is
never
pick claw, by the way.
pick claw. That makes
Pick
sense.
claw.
But it's never explicitly stated that that's what they found, as far as I could tell. But that's my headcanon, and I think there's enough pointers there. Obviously, they make their black and iron armor, black and alloy armor with it and stuff.
Mhm.
So they're always finding stuff. And a lot of the goblins continue to worship Rallis Zek today, right? That's why the Pick Claw goblins have Zek speakers. Those are their clerics. So, yeah, the goblins come here, and they literally have like a chief archaeologist, right? And he drops an archaeologist pack. It's like the weight reduction bag, because he's always carrying a bunch of shit in it from his digs. So Permafrost gets these goblins. They're there, okay, and then they get, I think, one. Well, I guess there's two. There's two more notable people that come. The first is Lady Vox. So Lady Vox arrives, and what happened with her? We're gonna have to go back to the EverQuest trailer DVD. Vishan scars the planet, right? So Vishan gave the dragons two rules. Oh, in fact, there might actually be only one rule. The one rule that we're told comes directly from Vishan is that two dragons of opposing colors shall never mate. Obviously, this happens, and it created what we know of as Carafirm, the sleeper. The second rule, I'm not sure if this was directly from Vishan. It might have been, but at least it's a law, and it was adhered to very strictly. A dragon may never kill another dragon. So the way this manifests is like the sleeper. They didn't kill him; they put him to sleep. Maybe it was because he's too powerful, right? But whenever dragons have beef, it tends to not end with one of them being killed by the other one. Zlandakar is eating corpses. He's like a heretic, but they're not sending anyone to kill Zlandakar, even though we know he killed Harladar's kid, Frakdar. I think it was Frakdar. Frakdar, which is the son or daughter of Harladar, if I'm remembering correctly, was killed, eaten alive, I think, by Zlandakar. That was his big crime that you could discover.
Zlandy like gets revived over and over, right? For us to kill. Is that his punishment?
You're thinking of Dozakar.
I'm thinking of Dozakar.
Now, I think there's good evidence that Dozakar the Cursed, Prometheus basically, he is the father of Carafirm. I think that's why he's the Cursed. He's got the most severe punishment of any dragon. They couldn't kill him. They couldn't put him to death, but they put him in this place, the halls of testing, where people who wanted to prove themselves to the dragons for loyalty could kill him, and he would automatically be resurrected over and over. So he's sentenced to die for eternity, but not at the hands of dragons.
Something interesting along this thread that I kind of put together while reading about Vox, because I wanted to do like a character analysis, like who is she? Why does she do the things she does? After that first great war over the prismatic dragon, over Carafirm, after Carafirm gets locked away, after, kind of collectively the Ring of Scale decides, along with Greater Dragon Society, these are the two rules that we're following, supposedly passed down by Vishan. Vox and Nagafen decide to go to Antarctica, and their kind of stated goal, along with falling in love, having an egg, birthing another prismatic dragon, is to overthrow the Ring of Scale, which feels very, Romeo and Juliet, like they're both from a house that doesn't allow it, blah, blah, blah. But I think it's really interesting that not only does Vox kind of have nothing left after she's imprisoned, she doesn't have Nagafen, she's essentially excommunicated from the Ring of Scale, but she still has the ability to cast clerical spells. And Zaide, you and I were talking about, is there anything in EverQuest that says that you have to have some sort of divine mandate in order to cast clerical spells? I think clerics can be agnostic in the game. Is that right?
I don't know.
Because that would be important to know. The reason I'm bringing all this up, folks, is if Vox is still able to cast cleric spells and clerics need a patron deity, it would suggest that Vox probably still has a connection to Vishan directly. In the book that I was reading as well, that Zaide has, that I also have, um, there's mentions of different divine acts, divine actions that she can take. And so to me, it brings up one of two things. Either Vishan thinks that this relationship between Vox and Nagi is legit, and, part of Dragon Society is just understanding that, your actions have consequences. Or maybe these laws were not directly passed down from Nagafen as like from Vishan as like a word of God. I just find it really interesting that Vox and Nagafen are trying to break up the Ring of Scale, and supposedly these laws came about after that prismatic dragon war directly involving the Ring of Scale.
While you were talking about it, I had an idea.
Tell me.
First, a point, because you asked. In EverQuest, clerics, druids, shamans, necromancers, paladins, rangers, beast lords, and shadow knights may not be agnostic.
Fascinating.
Which there's a whole other can of worms with like, why can't a necromancer be agnostic? But at the very least, we can probably safely assume that clerics must receive their magic from a deity.
Mm.
Now, here's my theory on why Vishan is still empowering Lady Vox, despite Lady Vox breaking literally the one or at least half of the rules. You know what I mean?
The two commandments.
Right. I give you two things. The whole planet was yours. There's two things you couldn't do. Yeah. For some reason, this is like totally off the top, right? Could be totally wrong. Something in my head is telling me that Moral Thule put Vishan into a magical slumber at her request. Something is telling me in my mind that right now Vishan is asleep. Moral Thule is like the son of Kazakh Thule. He is the god of dreams.
So not the nightmare girl, the dream boy.
Right. Terrace, if it's not literally
Terrace.
family, they're like demigods, but Terrace is the nightmare girl, right? Terrace Thule. And then he is just the dream. Yeah, he's the dream boy, as you say.
What leads you to believe that? Because I know the Vishan is pretty sort of disconnected from the Age of Turmoil in general. Well, at least the bards are the only people that apparently can connect with Vishan somehow.
That it is interesting that only bards can worship her. Why do I think that? It's not that I think that. It's that I think I read it somewhere a long time ago. I'm going to actually look it up while we're doing the podcast so that we can like validate that. But there's other things I want to talk about, so I'm not just like stopping and doing that. There's other things I want to talk about with Lady Vox and the story you told. So Lady Vox originally left the Claws of Vishan with the Ring of Scale. She was a member of the Ring of Scale, right? And there's reason to believe that she was in high standing with both factions in her time. She has the Crystal Claw of Vishan, which has got to be an incredible artifact. It's literally a shard of the claw that scratched the world when Vishan arrived at Norath. Lady Vox was in possession of that. So an incredible artifact. In Temple of Vishan, I'm pretty sure there's still a painting of Lady Vox on the wall. I'd have to double check, but there's a series of paintings on the wall. And I think actually most of the paintings are paintings of the Ring of Scale members, now that I think of it.
That's really interesting. That's kind of like she's the high priest of Dragon Society. I mean, she's got the holiest artifact, right? It'd be like
she's definitely important.
Jesus's fingernail, basically.
And she has one half of the Tome of Ages.
You're gonna have to bring me back through the Tome of Ages a little bit.
The frost-covered book, the torn frost-covered book that she has. Nagafen has the torn burnt book. When you combine them for the Paladin epic, you're creating the Tome of Ages. And you give that tome to the Oracle of Kaarnan in Ocean of Tears. And he gives you Miragul's phylactery, which he stole while Miragul was stuck in his weird like corpse thing that we talked about last time.
That's what I'm trying to think of. It all circles back in on itself, folks. Ugh. While Zaide's looking that up, something else I kind of picked up on Vox too. The book at least talks a lot about her motives being very much like somebody with nothing to lose, that revenge is just driving her. Unfortunately, the book brings up something I thought would be very cool if it were in the canonicity of the game, which is an egg, essentially, that she has laid and is waiting to hatch. Probably just a plot point within the book itself. It doesn't seem to be critical to the age of turmoil that we're in. Or maybe your headcanon can be we raid her lair, we find the egg and kill it or something. I couldn't find any references later on about any sort of child of Vox that comes on, or silver dragon egg later on down the line in either like EQ1 or EQ2 lore. Also interesting, Vox's character in the Sword and Sorcery book speaks a number of different languages: Dragon, Elder Dragon. Vox also speaks Barbarian. Vox speaks Elvish, which I thought was the most interesting. Like, what elves is she hanging out with? Giantish, Goblin makes sense. Ogre, which I thought was pretty interesting. It makes sense now, say that you tell us a little bit more about like the old ogre tribes of the north. Vox also speaks Old Erudian, which I wonder if that is suggesting that she's hearing some of the whispers or the magical influence of Marigold nearby. She's got to be aware of him, right?
So what I would assume for all those languages, Elvish, she knows Elvish because of the dragon. The dragons obviously at some point got really close to the elves because
really close.
Lethar. So one thing here is dragons in fantasy and also in EverQuest, especially early EverQuest when they did the GM events for plot, could take on illusions of other races. And it happened frequently. So we can assume that Lady Vox had that same power. Now, when the dragons of Norath lived in the center of Antonica, that was like their primary location, they had a literal scale from Vishan still. And there was a dragon named Lethar who became like the keeper of this scale. And I think he took on the form of a high elf, his illusion of a high elf, and he mated with another elf. And the first Draken was born. That's how the Draken race came to be. And it created his son, Dinaleth.
How was that received by the dragons? Since we're talking about like dragon politics,
right?
And, like mixing bloodlines, because that sounds like they were pretty chill with that, all things considered.
Honestly, like everything we've seen about the dragons suggests they're pretty cool with other people outside of the Ring of Scale. But even the Ring of Scale, I think Vox and Nagafen are the only dragons that we can't get on good terms with in early EverQuest. You can get ally with Ring of Scale and you can walk around and you can actually like, they changed it later so you could actually get quests from the Vishan's Peak dragons and help them and be their servants.
Oh, that's awesome.
And we already know like Temple of Vishan, like you could walk all over there. You can't go to the North Temple of Vishan even if you're an ally because it's a holy place only for dragons. But the dragons, while they look down on you a little bit, they're not terrible. And if you talk to like Clandakar and Sontalak, they'll tell you like, hey,
Santi, yeah.
They're like, we knew this day would come. At first, it would just be a trickle of people, and eventually, like the younger races, they are too fast. They populate quickly. They're too ambitious. The dragon kind is going to be lost, and the dragons on Velius already see their society as kind of like the dragons on Velius see the peak of draconic civilization as being in the past. They look at their time on Norath as kind of like being up in a way.
That's super interesting when we think about the power level of a prismatic dragon and the fact that basically all of Dragon Society has the ability to make like super weapons just by mating with the opposite brood. And I don't know. I think that kind of suggests like a moral purity in dragon kind to be like, we would rather die out and let the younger races of Norath prosper than to essentially take the nuclear option and make a whole race of Kira firms and let that be our future.
Yeah, I mean,
It's an interesting quandary.
most of them are pretty good, and I mean, even the Ring of Scale only took direct action against the Ixar when they thought the Ixar were becoming a big threat on Cunark. So
Hmm.
the dragons are kind of the good guys in EverQuest for the most part.
Yeah, that is super interesting. Everybody else seems very driven by um, the agendas of gods or mortals, and it seems like the dragons are sort of having their own story that our story just bleeds into.
I think the dragons were more or less abandoned by their god.
Mm.
Vishen came, dropped the kids off, and has not come back to daycare to pick them up, and it's overdue. If you think about like what does Lord Yelenak, the leader of the Claws of Vishen, do? He just sits up in his tower all day. There's no other dragon in Sky Shrine. It's just drakes and worms.
Mm.
He's there alone. All the dragons have already left the Sky Shrine.
That's an interesting thought.
Think about how sad that is.
I guess it is interesting too, reading about Vox and getting this characterization in the Sword and Sorcery book that she's just very content to continue plotting her schemes and sitting as sort of like a de facto ruler over the goblins, over the giants. Yeah, that's interesting. It's like all these dragons have their own little fiefdoms.
Yeah. Now, Lady Vox, so she was part of the Ring of Scale. She fell in love with Lord Nagafen, and they decided that they were going to try to mate, even though they knew exactly what that meant. And they probably knew Carafrim, like they knew him personally, right? Dragons live a long time. The odds that they physically met Carafrim and saw the destruction that he wrought across Velius and across Dragon Society is very, very high. So they knew what they were doing, because not only was he super powerful, but he's said to be mad, right? Like he's crazy. And they still decided to go ahead with it. Now they knew it was risky, so they had a backup plan. Their backup plan was if they were caught, rather than become prisoners or whatever would happen to them, they would flee to these locations on Antonica, and then they would meet back up once it had cooled down. So they did get caught by the Ring of Scale. So they did flee. She went to Permafrost. He went to Solsec B. And what they didn't count on was the Ring of Scale followed them and used magic to trap them both in their lairs so they can't leave. Lady Vox does lay an egg, but the egg will never hatch. There's two potential reasons. The reason that is suggested in some of these books, the Nagafen book talks about it, is that because it's an egg of the two opposite forces, it's in permafrost, but it needs the fires. It needs the heat of a fire dragon to be able to hatch. The other theory, and I forget where I read this, but I don't put as much stock into it, was that Jaladar used magic to make it so the egg would never hatch.
Yeah, that just seems like a throwaway line.
Yeah, it's just like a little too, I don't like it that much. And I know it's a big part in EverQuest too. It's like 100% canonicity that the egg exists. I don't think that it ever hatched though. And I think Lady Vox actually dies in EverQuest too. Like you see her ghost or her shade or something in Permafrost now.
I know we were thinking about back on the giant episode, why the goblins are digging that door in the back of Lady Vox's room, especially if we think at all that there's some sort of geographical possibility between Everfrost and Solazek.
I think that's exactly what it is. If you look at the old map of EverQuest, Everfrost Peaks and Lavastorm Mountains are right next to each other. I'm pretty sure they literally touch. Like Everfrost Peaks eventually just turns into Lavastorm. And I think that door in the back of Lady Vox's lair is the beginnings of a tunnel that is intended to tunnel right there. and it's not big enough for Lady Vox to walk there, and it would take an immense amount of time to do it. But I think the idea is to make a tunnel big enough so that the priest of Nagafin could take the egg back to Nagafin.
It looks like the Frigid Plains is right up against Skyfire, which we read in the book that the Frigid Plains goes on even further east beyond Permafrost.
It can't be Skyfire. You mean Lava Storm, right?
I mean Lava Storm. Sorry. Yeah, the Frigid Plains, Lava Storm, they're right next to each other, and we know that the Frigid Plains goes east, even touching the sea on the northeastern portion, past Perma. So absolutely, with enough Goblin engineering, you can get just about anywhere underground in EQ.
Yeah. Now, Lady Vox has time. Like, that is the only thing that Lady Vox has. Yeah. Time is not an issue for her. In fact, in Dragons of Norath, they tell us that it takes 100 years for a dragon egg to hatch. So it seems crazy to be like, what, you're going to tunnel all the way from Permafrost to Lava Storm? Like, yeah. She's like 10,000 years old. Yeah.
She's exactly got a captive audience too.
Right. It's like, she also, she doesn't have to do it. All she's doing is chilling in her room all day. I'd be like, yeah, goblins, like, let's get to it. I'll be here. Let me know when it's done. Why wouldn't you do it?
Dude, imagine being a goblin like generations in, 5 generations in, and you're like, yeah, we dig this tunnel. That's what we do.
Yeah.
Because the dragon tells us to. That's it. That's all you need to know, son.
Yeah, and I would imagine the goblins maybe don't even know that she could just fly out and leave, right? If I was Lady Vox, I would keep that close to the chest. Because if they know that she can't leave, you just be like, all right, later.
I imagine they probably wouldn't. Probably goblins aren't going to be thinking that critically. Maybe the giants, but they're kind of deteriorating too. She's got like
this. Are probably worse off than the goblins now.
This mass army, yeah, of intellectually stilted, powerful people.
So that's kind of the situation with Lady Vox. Was there something else that we were supposed to touch on? Why I think Vishan is just dreaming. I couldn't find where I got it from. I found an EQ2 forum post that mentions it. And the guy says, I remember reading somewhere, blah, blah, blah. The same thing that I remembered reading. So I don't know where it was. I saw it, but I feel like I saw that somewhere. So if we assume that is correct, Vishan is sleeping, then the fact that this dragon defied her rule might not even be something she's cognizant of.
That's true. That's true.
And so Lady Vox retains her clerical powers, even having broken the commandments of her deity.
Definitely something that can be brought up in a further DramaQuest lore episode if we find an errata. If anyone knows, put it in the comments. Email Zaide at EverQuest.
EverQuest.com.
Yeah. Zaide, we've now talked about the local area. We've talked about some of the largest power influences between Miragul, Vox, a lot of the old empires and races. We've recognized that goblins, giants, barbarians, even ogres have made this area home. I feel like, personally, Permafrost is an excellent sort of distillation of a lot of the local flavor that goes into Everfrost Peaks. And it's kind of transformative in that the dungeon commands its own presence when you enter it. During your Pantheon stream, I was asking you kind of what zones had the biggest atmospheric effect for you. I know that EK and East Commons are some of your favorites. For me, Perma is actually one of my favorites. And much different than other zones, other dungeons, I feel like Perma does a great job of making each room feel like its own special camp, its own special spot. Like, there's no 2 rooms between the flag room, the archaeologist room, the track to get there, the bear pits in game that really feel alike. When you get low enough in Guk, for instance, a lot of hallways kind of feel pretty similar. And Guk feels like this one continuous string that you dive down. Everfrost feels very sort of staccato, like step by step in terms of dungeon delving to me. I'm wondering, when it comes to what works for you for Everfrost, or not Everfrost, for Permafrost, what can you identify?
Like what I like about it.
Yeah, what do you feel like really makes it effective as a zone, as a vehicle for lore, as the place where you get introduced to one of the raid bosses of the game? What does ever or keep saying that? What does Permafrost do to really earn that?
Well, it was your opinion. I think permafrost sucks. No, no, I'm just kidding. Um, Permafrost, like you pretty much sold me on it. I think permafrost is actually maybe the best, one of the best flavorful zones in EverQuest. And I say this because I can't think of a single other zone that conjures up better feelings of an actual ruin
Mm,
than permafrost. Like you walk in, and every room you see evidence of it used to be good, and now it's been a long time. Like the flag room has the flag. There's things destroyed. You walk into like some of the areas near the priest, and you can see like the floor turns into broken stone, and everything plays into it so well. And yeah, I mean, it really does. When you go there and you play, it just feels that way. It feels like you're in an ancient ruined keep, and you know it's old. The name permafrost, permanent. You know what I mean? It's been there. It's been there. It's older than
yeah,
you,
it's
older than the
perpetual.
people who are here.
It
And
reminds me of like if you know go in an old haunted house and you like scrape the dust off of books. I feel like as you clod around in permafrost, you're like taking snowdrifts aside and seeing
yeah,
like old things on the wall or old things on the floor.
I mean, there's even an archaeologist in there, right? You walk into that room past the two gates,
Mm.
and it's almost like that room collapsed. You know what I mean? It's almost like the floor collapsed inward, and now
It's
we're
like
on
an
a lower level,
excavation in progress.
right? And then you get into Lady Vox's room, and there's a bunch of people frozen in ice. And I think that's super cool. And even her room has that door in the back that just kind of leads to nowhere. There's a little lingering touch of mystery on the zone
Hmm.
that 25 years later still leaves room for the player imagination.
Are there things that you feel like you got a taste of in permafrost, but you wish would have been developed more? You would have seen more of the story, more of the environmental storytelling.
I mean, it could always be bigger, but what would be better would have been if the goblins, well, not just goblins, if there was an actual name. I don't like that it is the goblin archaeologist, the goblin scryer. I want it to be
Mm.
like, first, you don't have to tell me it's a goblin. I know it's a goblin. It could be like scryer so and so. They did it right with King, right? King Thex the fourth.
Yeah, yeah.
King Thex Ka the fourth. That tells me a lot. Take God, I can't talk. Take King Thex Ka the fourth, and with that in your mind, look at the scryer room, where in the back there is literally a goblin frozen in a block
Hmm.
of ice with a crown on his head. I mean, I assume that's King Thex Ka the third,
The third, yeah.
right? Yeah. When Lady Vox arrived, he wasn't with it, and the fourth guy was like, "I don't agree with what that guy said, so I'm, whatever you want." You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like the story
anything you
writes
say.
itself.
Yeah, it really does. Yeah. I think they did a great job in Chardock of doing that, where the placeholders would be, an overseer
They did,
or
yeah.
an underking or whatever, and then the actual name mob had a name to it, and it kind of let you know too, like, oh, this is the placeholder. This is someone taking the place of the mob you're looking for.
Yeah, Chardock mastered that, the naming convention, but they forgot everything else. Chardock is literally just a series of copy paste brown walls, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the bank is awesome. The
Yeah,
waterfall. Um, what was that? The dog area, the dog kennels or whatever.
yeah.
Give me more of that piece. I feel like Permafrost has that type of storytelling, that type of environment in spades.
Here's what I think
Um,
is like Chardock has a bank, they have merchants, they have dogs, like they have pets, right? Outside, there's like a huge castle wall. If you walk in my house, there are pictures of my family on the walls,
mm,
right? Why does Chardock have 8,000 feet of bare stone tunnel with no, you know what I mean? their race is not too different from our race. They have pets. There's a banker. You know what I mean? They should have decoration. There should be things that tell you the glories of the Sarnak empires.
Yeah, this isn't a ruin either. This is a massive Sarnak
Right?
fort.
This is like their capital city. The king is there.
Hmm.
The king and queen live there. There should be like a lot more pomp and circumstances on the walls.
Other than just sort of these names, because we can say, okay, Chardock did that excellent. Maybe a place like Seb does a better job of getting that environmental storytelling back as well. Is there anything that you feel like might be beneficial for Permafrost that if you could change, you would? Because in my mind, my wish list would be, I want to see those other 2 floors. I want to see those collapsed floors and get a little bit more about like giant lore and giant artifacts.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it would be cooler if the items that were dropped, and this could pretty much be applied to every EverQuest named mob.
Very true.
The items that are dropped should tell me more about them. Right. And I guess some of them do. Like the thing that is dropped by the king is the symbol of loyalty to Vox. I mean, that speaks volumes,
yeah,
right?
That's it.
But what is the scryer drop?
He drops a ice crystal staff he wears too, right?
Right, it is, yeah. What does the scryer drop? The ice crystal staff?
Yeah, I mean it's kind of interesting. Archaeologist pack, kind of interesting.
Right. I feel like it could be like that tells us things that like we know about them already, right?
I choose to believe that Vox wears the RBB as a ring. Because how is that thing going to fit on a dragon?
Right. Well, the dragons are easy. They all keep treasure hoards. If she finds it, she just wants to keep it, probably.
Fair enough.
Yeah. But yeah, I think there should be more names. I think the items should drop and have a little bit more lore to them, though there are some good ones here. And I don't know if there's anything more to it than that. Like, it's already a really good zone. There's not a lot I would change.
What would you say is your favorite camp for XP and then for items in Perma? Because I spent a lot of time in there for XP.
What is the camp? After the flag room, you go left instead of right.
Yep.
And you are just in that room, and there's like a bunch of hallways there that you pull.
Oh, yeah. I don't know what you'd call it. It's before the archaeologist. Yeah. I think it's right before Scryer too, right?
No, Scryer's on the right side.
Scryer's on the right side. Yeah, I'm thinking of right before archaeology. Yeah, because there's that broken out wall where they're doing their further dig.
Is it the jail? Is it the jail area?
No, jail's to the right.
It's to the right too. Okay, that's what I thought. So like, yeah, I don't know what it is, but the wall breaks out, and that area I really loved grinding there. It's like the only area. If I go to a different area, we die. Especially if I go to that right side, you're definitely dead. It's like the area that is best EXP in my experience.
Yeah, good luck getting through those gates as well. When you have to like click the button from the other side of the gate.
Oh, yeah.
Terrible.
You're dead.
You're screwed.
The camp I like the most visually, I mean, it's got to be the same as everybody else, right? The Scryer room. It's got the big symbol on the floor that remains a mystery. It's got the candles around the room. It's got the frozen king in the back. It's hard to beat that, man. That has a lot of ambiance there, and it speaks so much to the zone and to goblins and everything that's going on there. It's super cool. I'm
going to respectfully give a contrary opinion.
Okay.
I love that room for the flavor. I think that Bear Pits does a really good job of making you feel really unsafe, which when I'm thinking about an EverQuest camp, I want to go somewhere dangerous. Like I want to push a group to its limits.
Yeah.
And yeah, obviously, if you're high 50s druid, you're fine soloing it. But in the 50s era, like in the classic era, that is a scary fucking place to be.
It is. Yeah, it is. But here's my question. What are the bears eating?
So in the book, it does say that there's like a stream that they're able to fish out of. We don't see that, obviously. I think the bears are eating whatever gets thrown down those trapdoors by Lady Vox. I think she has a good time throwing goblins to those bears.
It's pretty much, just like goblins, right?
Yeah, it's got to be.
Goblins.
I would love if you could loot like a goblin foot off of the bears or something like
That
that.
would be good. See,
Goblin
that's what I'm
bone.
talking about. Yeah, that loot should show you part of the story. Um, one thing I like, and you only experience this basically in the trilogy client. If you can play like on TAC P, I think you can get the trilogy client working in a real janky way. Trilogy client lets you hear the soundtracks, not just like
Ooh.
the sound cues in zones. If you walk around Permafrost, there are areas where you can hear the roar of a dragon.
Oh, I love that.
And there are areas where you see claw marks on the wall. And if you think about it in 1999, when things weren't data mined, you maybe didn't even know there was a dragon there. It's a dungeon right by a newbie zone. The entrance mobs are like level 7. Why would there be a dragon here? But you hear the roar.
The first time you saw that ice giant too, in that open pit room, I bet people shit their pants at like level 30, 40 trying to group in there.
Yeah. Yeah, you open it and you're like, oh my goodness, right behind the door.
Oh, wrong place.
Yeah, and he can aggro through those doors, so you know by the time you click the door and open, it's too late.
He's
on
coming.
you. Yeah. Luckily, the Ice Giant Diplomat is like really weak for a giant.
Oh, that's the diplomat.
Yeah.
Oh, he has a name in the book as well.
Yeah,
that's super interesting. So
now,
he spends a lot of time with Vox.
Yeah. Now I like that the diplomat is the first giant you see. It makes sense, right? Like if any goblin wanted to go talk to Vox, the first boom right there. So
it's like a bodyguard.
Right. Yeah. Now, what else were we? I feel like we're missing something here.
Content wise, question wise, thoughts wise.
I don't know. I know the priest of Nagafin obviously like was sent there by Nagafin as an emissary, to keep things moving. But we don't really see the counter side of that in Soul B in game, though the book tells us
they'd probably just melt.
Yeah. I mean, why? I guess like he doesn't freeze to death, but it does mention that the ice giants hate the Soul B giants. The ice giants are starting to worship Lady Vox. They've given up on Ralosek. But as a result, the two giant factions hate each other because, like, if you remember, the Soul B giants are super all in on worshiping Ralosek still.
I wonder if there's some way that those giants are actually being tricked into worshiping Vishan.
Yeah, I mean, the cleric thing comes up again, right? With all the ice giant priests. Like, how are they getting their magic if they worship Lady Vox? I don't know. I think Vishan is a good answer if we must have an answer outside of game design.
Yeah, sorry. I know I'm a speculation guy.
No, but I mean that we're supposed to do that, right? Like it's in the world, so now we have to figure out why it's that way, and it can't be because Abzor didn't feel like coming up with a lore text that day.
You were mentioning some GM event scripting.
Oh, yeah.
I think that was the thing.
That's it. The Crystal Claw Vishan, that whole thing.
Boom.
Okay, so there was a few GM events in Classic that we have to think of here. First, there was an event where in Kanos Hills, a bunch of people showed up and they were dragons in illusion, and they were asking adventurers to show them the way to Permafrost. So the adventurers they escort them to Permafrost, and when they're there, they find out Lady Vox is like freaking out because someone stole the Crystal Claw of Vishan. They intercept the person who stole it, and it was an agent of Carson McCabe. So they intercept him and they kill him, and they get the Claw of Vishan back, and they're like, "Okay, but we're going to keep this. We're not going to take it back to Lady Vox." But then they get attacked by Mayong Mistmore.
Of course.
And they defeat Mayong's forces, and they were going to do a ritual in the Wrath Mountains that would allow them to permanently rend the veil, and it would awaken all the dragons across Norath that were in a deep slumber. But so many of the dragons were killed by Mayong's forces that they were unable to complete the ritual. And so they just gave the adventurers there a title for having helped them. And one adventurer might have been given the Crystal Claw of Vishan, but that was just an artifact in game terms. So the other thing is the Crystal Claw of Vishan is eventually used by Al-Kabor after players get it from Lady Vox, either by stealing or killing her. In game they kill her, but I think in lore terms, it was stolen from Lady Vox by the players and given to Al-Kabor, and he uses it to tear the veil, allowing them to access the plane of sky. And that's how the plane of sky opening happened in game, with that GM event of getting it from Lady Vox and giving it to Alcabor.
So that makes sense when we think about the Fulligan stones in Inuruk and sort of needing some connection, some piece of godhood, some corporeal representation of the god in order to access their plane.
Yeah. So those were the two GM event pieces I wanted to touch about. I wish those were better documented, but it's really hard to find anything on those old GM events. And sadly, that's where like the story was. Recording your computer screen just wasn't a big thing back then. So not a lot.
Are you finding these scripts on like old forum posts? Or?
Yeah, you go to like Internet Archive and look it up, and then you just have to trust, right? Or there's like a Lore of Norath website that has some of them there if people documented them. It's a dig trying to find some of that stuff, and then you never know really how valid it is. Yeah, usually the dumb stuff is really dumb, and you can suss it out though.
You're doing Quellius's work by digging through that stuff, because there's no way. The best I can do is try and come up with some ideas based off of a book that I definitely own in the back of my library.
Liverflap, it's okay to say that you read the PDF.
I don't know, man.
It's illegal to say that you scanned it in and distributed the PDF.
Oh, is that true? Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know where I got it. I don't know who would have scanned this.
I think that's literally where copyright, like the copy and copyright. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, Zaide, thanks for taking us on a journey, man. I appreciate you bringing this to us and kind of this whole saga, right? This whole area of Antonica that has just only been partially demystified, because there's so much that could still be talked about with Barbarians, with Hollis, with Blackburrow, with Kanos. Like, all of these areas are really integral to this combined story, but we've gotten this nice little tip of the iceberg, pun intended.
Yeah. Now, upcoming lore episodes that the Flap and I will do together, we're going to be doing a Kunark series. Some of our patrons, some of my patrons for the podcast have requested Kunark, so we're going to be doing Kunark. But I've got to say at the outset that Level Up Larry, if you Google him or search him on YouTube, has already done an incredible series on the lore of Kunark. And my lore will not be better than his. His is already top notch. When I'm preparing to do it, I'll read all the lore, and then I will also listen to his videos. Like, that's how good it is. His lore is really good. So check him out. He did Kunark in a fantastic way. But if there's any other lore that you guys want to see, feel free to toss it in a YouTube comment. I can't guarantee that we'll do it, but if you list something that piques my interest or something that I can answer to pretty easily, I will definitely do it. So either find something totally off the wall that I can spend a week of my life trying to figure out, or something that I just know off the top, and we'll try to answer those. I think that is all I've got. I got some pretty big interviews hopefully lined up. I got potentially 2 developer interviews, current or former developer interviews lined up in the next month.
That's super cool, man. I hope if they come on, that if they dive into these lore videos at all, they have a good time chuckling at this the thoughts and what's the word? Conjectures that we got completely wrong, or things that maybe they didn't even think of before.
Yeah. I should reach out to like Tony Garcia and see if he'll come on just to talk about lore.
He's a lovely guy. I'm really happy with his involvement in the community still.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, Liverflap, are you going to go to Fippy Fest? Did you see that?
Ooh, that's like a couple grand, right?
It's $1,500 US.
I am waiting for the official endorsement of Liverflap by Dark Paw Studios that comes along with a free ticket to Fippy Fest. Then I'll be there. I'll bring my Pochita plushie. I'll get a Bard epic tattoo. I'll do all of it.
Well, they just released the new policy for the Daybreak Games content creator policy, right? Did you see that?
No.
Yeah, so they're going to be partnering and sponsoring certain content creators. You have to apply. Details to come on how to apply. I think 600 people DM'd me the article today to make sure I knew, and I was like, listen, there is a like between 0 and 1% chance that they would ever let me be part of the content creator program. Okay, so I appreciate the thought, and I will apply, because if there's one thing that Zaide does, it's shoot his shot. But I do not expect that they will accommodate me there.
I think they would be smart too, just because of the community you've created, the different guilds that are behind you. Love you or hate you, Zaide, you have been a pillar of EverQuest content and EverQuest culture, if I can say it.
Liverflap, you're not allowed to say good things about me on my own podcast. Okay, you can't do that.
Okay, fine. Your head's big.
Yeah, it is big. Like, my cat is straining. Yeah, it's just a weird spot. I feel like you can't be a person who does like lore videos and content creation kind of stuff and be a guild leader at the same time. You're not supposed to be. It's almost like a weird conflict of interest. Like, you do a show called DramaQuest, and then you also provoke a lot of the drama that you talk about.
So I'm going to posit something.
Yeah.
I think the developers, whether at the outset or eventually seen what the game turned into, absolutely have drama as a game feature, not a bug. There is no possible way that you can go through the game with the amount of player push from zone to zone, with the amount of resources that are dedicated to only the highest achieving guilds or the most dedicated grinders, and not have some level of not only drama, but really also politics and reputation. I think that that's something that you and I both agreed. The reputation aspect of EverQuest sets it apart from so many other MMOs. But I think that being a piece of the ongoing drama, the ongoing narrative of EverQuest, is just part of creating content. We all do it as players. Every time we, send a tell to create a group, every time we make some bullshit guild, that's you making the world more alive. So I would posit that that's a healthy thing. And I think that you're more than within your right to do it.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we will see. Liverflap, before I let you go, are you going to play on the 25th anniversary TLP?
I already bought my year subscription. I'm dialed in.
Let's go. Okay.
Yeah, I'm set.
Have you picked out a guild yet?
I'm considering where to take my talents, where to take my ninja AFKs during raid.
Right.
Yeah, I'm thinking about joining. It's like a couple people that I know from a previous server. It's called Faceless. So I'm thinking about going there. They're kind of no name.
I heard that guild is full of pieces of shit.
Yeah. Well, it's full of hackers and really bad people, really rude people. There's this video. I'll send it to you. It's from this guild called Amtrak. It's really good. Yeah, they detail it. I don't know how they got Michael Rappaport to do it, but you'll see. It's a good primer on Faceless.
Yeah, he speaks a lot about our body composition.
True.
Yeah.
Dude, I gotta say, those back and forths have got to be some of the best things I've ever seen.
We wanted to do more of them on future servers, and we couldn't because it's a fucking $1,000 to get Ice-T to do a video now. Like, man, I don't want it that much. $1,000.
We got to find like an inconspicuous but hilarious like internet celebrity.
Have you ever gone to any anime conventions?
No, not yet, unfortunately.
There's this one in Baltimore called Otakon.
Okay.
And there's a guy who stands outside the convention, and he just stands out there with no shirt, jean shorts on. He's totally ripped. Like, he could be a bodybuilder. And all he does is sing the whole time. Ice cold water, only $1. Totally inflation proof. It's been $1 for like 15 years. And that dude is famous. Like, now people go to Otakon cosplaying as the ice cold water dude.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, dude, he's the Costco hot dog of Anime Expos.
Yeah, he is, seriously. So we need someone who's like that for EverQuest. Yeah.
I'll have to think about it.
Someone's got to rise to that occasion. I need Photech. True. I thought Photech told you. Now we're bringing out the real guns to show you. Do you ever hear that song?
No,
I'm gonna
you
send
gotta
it to you
send that
after
to me.
this.
Yeah, please.
It's called Fuck Insidious.
Okay.
All right, folks. We've been rambling enough. This was great. I hope to see you guys back for some more content soon. And see you on the 25th anniversary TLP. Zaide, Liverflap, DramaQuest, out.
Adios.